My name is Patrick, and I died for 15 minutes. And when I crossed to the other side, I met Jesus. What he showed me changed the way I understand prayer, tears, and everything I thought I knew about being close to God. I want to tell you this story exactly as it happened to me, without adding anything or taking anything away, because I believe some of you need to hear it today. Not because I'm special. I'm not a pastor. I'm not a theologian. I'm just a 44-year-old man who worked in construction for over 20 years, who used to think prayer was something you did out of obligation, a checklist item before meals and before bed. I want you to understand where I was before this happened, because it matters. It matters because if it can happen to someone like me, it can mean something for someone like you. Let me start with the day itself. It was an ordinary Tuesday. I remember that detail because ordinary days are the ones that fool you into thinking nothing significant will ever happen in them. I was at work. We were pouring concrete for a foundation. Nothing unusual, nothing dangerous by any normal measure. I felt a tightness in my chest around mid-morning, and I brushed it off the way men my age tend to brush things off. We tell ourselves we're too busy to be sick. We tell ourselves it's probably just stress, or the coffee, or that we slept wrong. I kept working. By early afternoon, the tightness had become something else entirely, a crushing weight, like someone had placed a slab of the very concrete we were pouring directly onto my sternum. I remember dropping to my knees. I remember one of my coworkers, a younger guy named Marcus, shouting my name. And then I remember nothing. Nothing at all, for what I'm told was almost 15 minutes. They called it sudden cardiac arrest. My heart simply stopped. No warning beyond that tightness, no history of heart disease that anyone knew about. One moment I was a man pouring concrete, worried about deadlines and mortgage payments, and the next moment, by every medical definition available to modern science, I was dead. I want to pause here and say something important. I'm not going to describe some elaborate scene of tunnels and lights, the way you might have heard in other testimonies, because that's not exactly what happened to me, and I promised myself I would only tell you the truth. What I experienced was something quieter than that, something that in some ways felt more real than the tunnel and light stories, because it wasn't visual spectacle, it was presence, it was an encounter. The best way I can describe the transition is that the noise of this world, the ache in my knees from 20 years of manual labor, the ringing in my ears from years around machinery, the constant low hum of anxiety I had, carried since my divorce 8 years ago, all of it simply stopped, not faded, stopped, the way a radio stops when you unplug it. And in that silence, I became aware of a presence that I can only describe as absolute love, given a shape I could perceive. I know how that sounds. I've turned that sentence over in my head 1,000 times since it happened, wondering how to say it in a way that doesn't sound like a greeting card. But there is no other way to say it. Love with a shape. Love that had a face. And the face was looking directly at me, and I knew, not believed, not hoped, but knew, that I was standing in front of Jesus. I didn't see robes and sandals the way religious paintings show him. I want to be honest with you about that too. What I saw was light, but light that somehow contained a face, contained eyes, that I can still see clearly in my memory to this day. Eyes that held more compassion than I have ever witnessed in any human being across 44 years of life. And when he looked at me, I didn't feel fear. I felt something I hadn't felt since I was a small child sitting on my grandmother's porch in summer. That feeling of being completely known and completely safe at the same time. He didn't speak to me the way we speak to each other, with sound moving through air into ears. It was more like understanding simply appeared in me, fully formed, the way you suddenly understand a joke a half second after someone tells it. Except there was no delay at all. Thought met thought instantly. The first thing I understood, without a single word being spoken aloud, was this: you are loved beyond anything you have measured love to be. That sentence appeared inside me, like it had always been there, like I was remembering it rather than learning it for the first time. And then he showed me something. I want to describe this carefully because this is the heart of everything I've come to share with people since I returned. He didn't show me the future. He didn't show me some prophecy about the end of the world or give me a date for anything. What he showed me was smaller than that. And yet somehow it was the largest thing I have ever witnessed. He showed me prayer. Not my prayers exactly, though those were somewhere in there too. He showed me what happens on the other side of the veil when a human being prays while crying. Genuine tears. Not performance, not the kind of crying people do for attention or as a habit, but the kind that comes from a place so deep inside a person that they can't control it even if they tried. The kind of crying that comes when someone is finally honest with themselves and with God at the same time. What I saw was this. Every tear that falls during genuine prayer, he showed me, does not simply evaporate into nothing the way we assume when we wipe our face with the back of our hand and move on with our day. Every one of those tears becomes something that rises. I don't have a scientific word for what I witnessed. The closest comparison I can give you is that it looked like light ascending, like each tear turned into a small point of brightness the moment it left prayer and moved upward, joining a great and constant stream of light rising from the earth in every direction, from every country, every language, every desperate kitchen table and hospital chapel and prison cell and roadside where a human being had ever bowed their head and cried out honestly to God. He let me watch this stream for what felt like both a single second and an entire lifetime, because time did not behave there the way it behaves here. I saw a mother somewhere crying over a child she had lost, and her tears rose like the brightest light I had ever seen, brighter even than what I understood to be the light of Jesus himself standing beside me. And I asked him, again, not with words, but with the whole of my being, I asked him why that particular grief burned so bright. And the understanding that came back to me was this: nothing moves the heart of God faster than a parent's tears for their child, because it echoes something of his own heart toward every one of us. He is a father who has wept for his children since before time, as we know it existed. I saw a man, somewhere else, crying alone in his car, in what looked like a parking lot at night, and his tears rose too, and I understood that this man had been carrying shame for decades, shame he had never spoken aloud to another living soul, and in that moment of finally breaking, finally being honest before God about the weight he carried, his prayer had reached heaven faster and with more power than any polished, rehearsed prayer ever could. This is the part I most need you to hear. Jesus showed me that we have it backwards, most of the time, about what makes a prayer powerful. We think the powerful prayers are the ones with the right words, the ones spoken with confidence and eloquence, the ones we say in front of others where we sound strong and certain and full of faith. But what I witnessed on the other side told a different story entirely. The prayers that moved fastest, that shone brightest, that seemed to reach the throne of God with the least resistance, were the broken ones, the desperate ones. The ones soaked in real tears from real pain, offered by real people who had run out of pretending. I understood, standing there, that tears during prayer are not a sign of weak faith, the way I had always privately believed they were. I had spent my whole adult life believing that a real man doesn't cry, that certainly a man of faith doesn't cry, that crying in front of God was somehow an admission that your faith wasn't strong enough to keep your composure. I was shown, without a single word needing to be spoken, how wrong that belief had been. Every tear I had swallowed back over 44 years, every moment I had bitten down on my grief, instead of bringing it honestly before God, I understood in that instant, had been prayers I never fully offered, opportunities for that closeness I never took. I want to tell you about my father, because this matters to the story. My father died when I was 19 years old, and I did not cry at his funeral. I stood there in a dark suit that didn't fit quite right, jaw clenched, because that's what I believed men were supposed to do. I told myself I was being strong for my mother, strong for my younger sister, strong because that's what my father himself had modeled for me his whole life. He never cried either, not once that I ever witnessed. And so I carried that same silence into my own life, into my own marriage, into my own eventual divorce, into every private moment of grief I ever experienced. I built an entire life around the belief that emotional restraint was a form of spiritual strength. Standing before Jesus, I understood how much of my life that belief had cost me. Not just in terms of my relationship with other people, though it had cost me plenty there too. My ex-wife will tell you that much herself if you ask her. It had cost me in my relationship with God. Every time I prayed with my jaw clenched instead of my heart open, I had been holding something back from the one relationship where nothing needed to be held back at all. He showed me one more thing, and this is the part that I think about every single day since I came back. He showed me a specific kind of tear, one that shone even brighter than grief, even brighter than the tears of that mother mourning her child. It was the tears of gratitude. He showed me people, all over the world, crying not because something terrible had happened to them, but because something good had happened, something they knew they didn't deserve, something that overwhelmed them with the reality of being loved by a God who didn't have to love them at all and chose to anyway. Those tears, I was shown, carried a particular kind of light, a warmth to it that the tears of pure grief didn't quite have, though both were precious, both rose, both were received. I understood, in that moment, that God is not waiting for us to suffer in order to draw close to Him. He simply wants honesty. Whatever is true in your heart in that moment, grief, gratitude, fear, relief, anger, even confusion about His own existence, that honesty, offered with tears or without them, but especially with them, is what He calls prayer in its truest form. Not the performance, the presence. I don't know how long I stood there with Him. Time, as I said, didn't work the way it works here. But at some point I understood that I was being asked, not forced, asked, whether I wanted to return. And I want to be completely honest with you about this part too, because I think honesty is the whole point of everything I'm telling you today. Part of me did not want to come back. The peace I felt there was unlike anything available to us in this life, even in our best moments, even holding my children the day they were born, even standing at the ocean at sunrise, even the happiest day of my marriage before things fell apart. None of it compares to the peace of being fully known and fully loved without any performance required. But I understood something else too. I understood that I had work left to do here, and that work was not some grand mission with a title or a stage. The work was simply this: to go back and tell people what I had seen about tears and prayer, and to live differently myself, to stop swallowing my grief, to stop believing that composure was closer to godliness than honesty was. I chose to come back. Or perhaps more accurately, I was shown that coming back was the right thing, and I accepted it, the way you accept truth when it's placed directly in front of you, with no room left for doubt. The next thing I remember is pain. Sharp, physical, undeniable pain in my chest, and the sound of Marcus's voice, and the flashing lights of the ambulance, and a paramedic's hands pressing down on my sternum with a force that would leave bruises for weeks afterward. 15 minutes, they told me later. My heart had been stopped for nearly 15 minutes before they got it beating again. And by every medical standard that exists, 15 minutes without oxygen to the brain should have left me severely impaired if I survived at all. The doctors at the hospital used the word miracle themselves, and these were not men prone to using that word lightly. One of them, a cardiologist who had been practicing for over 25 years, told my sister he had never seen anyone come back after that long with no measurable brain damage. I spent 4 days in that hospital, and I cried more in those 4 days than I had cried in the previous 25 years of my adult life combined. I cried when my sister walked into the room. I cried when my ex-wife, who I hadn't spoken to in almost 2 years beyond logistics about our kids, came to see me and held my hand without either of us saying a single word about anything except that she was glad I was alive. I cried during the night, alone, thinking about my father, finally grieving him the way I should have grieved him 25 years earlier at his funeral. And every single time I cried, I felt closer to God than I had ever felt saying a single rehearsed prayer in my entire life. It has been 8 months now since that Tuesday. My life looks different, though not necessarily in ways you'd immediately notice if you only saw me from the outside. I still work construction. I still live in the same house. But something fundamental has shifted in how I approach my relationship with God and with the people around me. I no longer see tears as a failure of strength. I see them now the way I was shown them that day, as a form of prayer more honest and more powerful than almost anything we can construct with careful words. I pray differently now. I no longer worry about sounding right. Some mornings I simply sit in my truck before work and let myself feel whatever I'm feeling, and if that feeling brings tears, I let them come, because I finally understand what they mean on the other side of the veil. I understand that somewhere, in a way I cannot fully explain with human language, those tears are becoming light, rising, being received by a father who has been waiting for that kind of honesty from me my entire life. I have reconciled with my sister in ways I never expected. I have started speaking to my children about grief and emotion in ways my own father never spoke to me, because I refuse to hand down that same silence to another generation. I have gone back to church, not because I feel obligated, but because I finally understand what it means to worship with your whole self instead of just your composed exterior. I don't know why this happened to me specifically. I've asked that question more times than I can count since that Tuesday. I wasn't living a particularly holy life before it happened. I wasn't praying more than anyone else, wasn't more deserving than the next man. If anything, I think that's part of the point. Grace doesn't wait for us to earn it. It meets us exactly where we are, even flat on our back on a concrete slab with our hearts stopped, even after 25 years of swallowing our own grief because we were too afraid or too proud to let it show. If you take one thing away from what I've shared with you today, let it be this. The next time tears come while you're praying, whatever the reason behind them, do not hold them back the way I did for so many years. Do not mistake that emotion for weakness. I was shown, with my own eyes, on the other side of this life, that those tears do not disappear into nothing. They rise. They are seen. They are received by a love so complete that it changed everything I thought I understood about what it means to be close to God. My name is Patrick, and I died for 15 minutes. And in those 15 minutes, I learned that the most powerful prayer I have ever offered wasn't spoken with my voice at all. It was written in tears.